Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov, good evening. We are back together in Mishpat Tzedek. I think I can say, Shechianu v'kimanu v'gyanu l'zman hazeh. And I'll tell you why. It's been a long time since we last got a chance to sit together and study. I know we had an opportunity recently, but Baruch Hashem, I think that we're back for the winter season, and I'm looking forward to utilizing this time in the best way possible. It has been over a year and 9 months since we last began to study together this series that we titled Mishpat Tzedek. And there's a part of me that debated very much, what do we do from here going forward? Those of you who've learned Torah with me for long enough know that I love introductions. And the reason I say that I love introductions is because I notice that most people learn Torah with no context whatsoever. They learn like if I throw you into the deep end of a pool, you will learn how to swim. Now, it could be, by the way, I'm going to tell you the truth. It could be that there are people who learn best by being thrown into the deep end of a pool. And likely, they will learn how to swim. At the very least, they will learn how not to drown. But I believe that if you were to ask a professional athlete, a professional swimmer, how is that person's technique? How is that person's style? They will tell you, it looks like they learned how to swim when they were thrown into the deep end of the pool and they were struggling not to drown. That's what it looks like. And there are definitely people who play piano like that. You know, when I was young, my parents sent me to music lessons for many, many, many years of my life. It's from one of their many investments that did not bear much fruit. And I studied piano for maybe 11 years, and you're sitting there with the piano, and the teacher is telling you, and you hold your hands and pretend there's an egg underneath your fingertips, and then you go to someone's house, and they play piano with one finger. You know, like it's how some people text. I'm not telling you, maybe it's a generational thing, but everybody in the way that they perform. And you say, wow, this person can play music, but I wonder if they really understand how to play music. And the same happens to me when it comes to Limud Torah. There are many people that learn Torah, but in my understanding, they approach Torah like a person who learned how to swim by being thrown into the deep end. And never in any type of methodical study. What are we learning? What is the context of what we're learning? Who are we? When I study Torah, Torah is a part of me, so I must know myself when I study this Torah. I must know the author of the book. I will never understand for the life of me how people can learn Torah for so many years. And then you'll ask them just brief biographical questions about the people whose books they're studying. And they have no clue. And I don't want to embarrass anyone now, but I'm sure that if you ever went to the Beit HaKnesset, you must have heard a derasha, something on the Chumash, maybe with Rashi, maybe with a commentary of the Rambam, maybe with Or HaChaim, I don't know what you might quote, the Malbim, the Radak, I don't know where Beit HaKnesset you hang out in and what they quote. But how could you study the writings of Rashi without knowing who he was? How can you study the writings of the Malbim without the context of his marriage, his divorce, his struggle with the maskilim of his generation? How can you study the writings of the Ramban divorced from the other fields and areas of discipline which he studied or those which he opposed vehemently, his relationship or with the Rambam? And so I'm never afraid to take introductions of facts. I already was going to skip the introductions 6 months ago. And as I was preparing for that shiur, the Rabbani told me, she said, Yonatan, where are you rushing to? These people in the Ben Midrash, they're going to be learning Torah with you forever, B'ezrat Hashem. So you have forever. You don't have to rush anywhere. B'ezrat Hashem, you'll be learning Torah forever. So you can take as many tangents as you need. And so I figure that a year and 9 months later, we can agree to open the laws of Sanhedrin of Rabbeinu Rambam. And all I'm going to tell you is that I reserve the right to take more tangents if I feel that they're needed to understand whatever is happening before us. And that likely the in-person shiurim that we will do in New York this coming year, those in-person shiurim, they might be the tangents. And it could be that the study that we have here is going to be a little more focused on the text. And that's when I switch gears to the other group of people in the room. I learned a long time ago in my Kehillat in San Diego that there are people who like tangents and there are people who don't. There are people who come to the shiur and the shiur was titled Parashat HaShavua. And now halfway through Parashat HaShavua, you're in the middle of discussing history or some rabbinic debate, or in the middle of a philosophical conversation, and they say, I didn't come here to study history. I came here to study Parashat HaShavua. And those people likely were trained in the West. In the West, nothing is connected with each other. The Torah is very, I don't know what the opposite of holistic is, but everything is divorced from each other. If I can borrow the language of the Kabbalists, it's a alma de peruda, it's all separation. You go to your doctor and you ask them a question about your arm, but he says, I'm only a leg doctor. I don't know anything about the arm. Or you go to your heart doctor, you ask him something about the brain. He has no clue about the brain. He only knows about the heart. And then you have so many specialists that don't know anything about a whole picture of anything. In religion, we have the same thing. There are people that were trained. If I'm coming to a class on one topic, then we better stay in the lane because we don't color outside of the lines. But that's why this is a Bet Midrash and it's not a class. In a Bet Midrash, we go wherever the Torah needs us to go. So the other group of people in the room, we're about to do something radically different from what we have done for the last year and 9 months. Instead of zooming out and looking at the macro picture, perhaps the future of the Jewish people and the Jewish state and Mishpat Tzedek and righteous judgment from a big picture point of view, maybe that of the prophets, if I could dare call it that. When we open up a book of law like that of Rabbeinu Rambam, we inevitably are going to focus on details. And as we focus on details, there are some people that get frustrated because, for example, I love the idea of Shabbat. I really got connected to the idea of Shabbat and connecting to the Creator and refreshing my soul and the days of creation and HaKadosh Baruch Hu rested and the Oneg Shabbat. I am into that. But what on earth does it have to do with not making tea in 2 cups of hot water with a tea bag? And what goes first, the hot water or the tea bag or the cup, or what kind of cup and how many cups? What does one have to do with the other? And very often the people that understood the bigger picture get really, really frustrated when it comes to discussing the details. And you'll see the opposite is true. Sometimes you'll involve yourself in a halakhic conversation with someone, and all they can talk about is details. Like, on that. So in somebody's house, can you open a can of pickles on Shabbat? Ribbon Olamim, you would think that the question they were discussing over here was, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu one, and what is the oneness of the creator of the universe? And when the Rambam says it's one, like there is no other one, they would be philosophizing. Here, they were doing the same thing, but about a can of pickles. Do you have to make a hole at the bottom? Can you open the top? Before you open the bottom, does it drain? If you drain it, does it boreh? And you sit there and you say, well, that's the least inspirational Shabbat meal I've ever been in my whole life. And likely when you talk to somebody who's obsessed with details, they have a hard time doing the opposite. They have the hard time zooming out and appreciating the greater context of halakha and why are we doing these things. And in the words of our rabbis, those 2 personalities are titled a Navi, prophet, and a Chacham, a scholar, a sage. See, the Navi'im, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu, Aleim Shalom, they had dreams, visions of the big picture of the Jewish people, what we're going to do, what we're going to be, what is the nation of Israel going to look like, what is the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu resting on the nations look like. And the Chachamim, a little bit less inspirational. Chachamim, they gave us also mitzvot, like washing your hands before bread, and lighting candles before Shabbat, and rabbinic laws. And yet you find that under the leadership of the prophets, the Jewish people are committing the worst crimes in history. Avodah Zarah, foreign worship, Gilu Arayot, forbidden sexual relationships, Shivichut Damim, murder, mamash murder, not to mention other averot that were going on in those times. And all of a sudden, when you switch from the big picture leaders to the let's zoom into how I put my shoes on in the morning leaders, all of a sudden, the Jewish people are blossoming. You don't find Ovdei Avodah Zarah, you don't find murderers, you do find the guy who rips the toilet paper on Shabbat. Yeah, that guy you find. But the one who's murdering his brothers or sisters, not really. Not really. Because something about focusing on details keeps Jews in check, whereas the big picture sometimes leaves the everyday person to be lost. That's why our rabbis tell us, Chacham, Adif Minavi. We prefer a chacham over a prophet, over a navi. But we have a hope. And the hope is in the end of times, we will have a righteous leader who is both a navi and a chacham, who's both a prophet and a scholar. And I've spoken about this before in a different shiur. I don't remember where, maybe in the Agarata playlist. That one day Jewish leadership will know how to tackle both the big picture and the details. And I'm asking for those of you that are chachamim, just like you weren't scared the last 9 months or a year and 9 months from thinking like Nevi'im, I'm asking for the Nevi'im in the group, please don't be scared. And for the next year and 9 months, we focus like chachamim on details. Because in those details, someone is going to have to make the connection to the bigger picture. I'm maybe going to quote sources that I don't usually quote in the shiur. There's a famous Ashkenazi chacham. His name was Rabbi Yosef Rosen, otherwise known as the Rogatchover. Very good. Call him the Rogatchover Gaon. Last time he came from a place called Rogatchover. That's why he got that name. I've never seen a picture of the Rogatchover, but it's a unique looking individual. Rabbi Yosef Rosen, alav shalom, was a very, very unique chacham. I think what most people don't know, at least when I was studying in Lithuanian yeshivot, they didn't tell me, was the Rogatchover was actually not just Hasidic. We don't even know which Hasidut he belonged to. It was Chabad, yeah. In fact, when the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, alav shalom, when he finished learning Torah with his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, he sent him to the Rogatchover to go learn Torah. And there's something important about that, because if you've ever studied, and I don't spend much time there anymore, but if you ever studied the writings of the Rogatchover, not Ta'aneach, you see that his whole mentality, the whole approach, is how to connect seemingly disconnected dots and put them together into one big picture. Something interestingly that in his own Hasidic way, the last Lubavitcher Rebbe did, and something you also find in the writings of another unique Ashkenazi Chacham, Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the famous Rav Kook. He had a very deep desire to connect the Klal and the Prat, the Prat and the Klal. How does the bigger picture of Shabbat connect with this tiny picture of how many cups of hot water I'm making my tea in? And they weren't the only Chachamim to try to think like that. But sometimes you have to make a concerted effort to think that way. I'm going to ask for those of us in the shiur in the coming months to try a little bit to do both. I want a little bit to think like a chacham, but also not to forget the nivuah, not to forget the style of our Torah, which also has in it a beautiful, bigger picture. And with that in mind, one last introduction to the class that ends the introductions. Shabbat was the 3-year anniversary of the passing of Mori Harav, Yaakov Peretz, Areni Kaparat Mishkolo.
3 months.
3 months. What did I say?
3 years.
3 years. See, that's how long it feels like. 3 months. Thank you, Rachel. 3 months since Harav Peretz passed away. And for me, I know that even sitting down and making this winter curriculum and which shiurim yes and which shiurim no and what we're going to focus on is always something that I would have had the opportunity to speak with him about, to consult with him about. And it's hard. It's hard to start projects. And then the people that supported you through them are not here to watch you continue them. And as I was feeling that today, I opened up Harav Kapach's Mishneh Torah. And this is his final, really it's not the final volume, but it's the final volume of the Mishneh Torah. And Rav Kapach wanted to share some final closing thoughts. If he, in the first volume of the Mishneh Torah, shared how lonely it is to be a student of the Rambam in the world, he wanted to seal this endeavor that people told him he would never finish, writing a commentary in the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. And he has in here a sentence, a very interesting one, that I'm sure those haters will hate and say, see, it wasn't really a chacham in the style of the Rambam. But for me, it's the quintessential Chacham who learned from the Rambam to accept truth from wherever it is found. And he also has a sad sentence here. And he says that even though we began this project, Omnam Bivichato Vashrato, with the blessing and the inspiration, Shel Adonenu Morenu V'Rabenu, of our master and teacher, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. That's the last Lubavitcher Rebbe. Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh V'Cham. May the righteous memory be a blessing. Ulatzarenu Siyamnu Ksheno Imanu. And unfortunately, we're finishing this project of the Mishneh Torah. Though we began with his blessing, I'm finishing it when he's no longer here with us. Nishmato began menuchot, his soul is in a final resting place. Yizicho baruch al kol pe'ulotav. May his memory be remembered for the good, for all of his actions. Hanimshachot gam ata leman Torat Rabbeinu Hagadol, which continue even today on behalf of the Torah of our great Rabbi the Rambam. V'tikvatenu hi shetakanato techil ad v'lo tamush mineged einenu. And our only hope is that his commitment to the Torah of Rabbeinu Rambam will not stop and will continue in the future. And I think in that regard I can say that though this Bet HaMidrash continues forward, it is always with the blessing and the inspiration of Mori Harav, and everything that we do here. Everything that we learn here should be not just Leilu Nishmato, but should be in the way that he would have approved, the way that he would have appreciated it. And with that in mind, perhaps I'll take you to the cover page. If you open up, there are two editions of Mishneh Torah in front of you. I recommend that you own both of them, but for those of you who are tight either on budget or on book space, I recommend one edition over the other. The two Mishneh Torahs that are in front of you, one is that of Rav Kapach, which is a huge set of 20-some volumes, with all of the notes and the additions and the fixings and the annotations of Rabbi Yosef Kapach, who took Yemenite manuscripts and ancient manuscripts and tied them together and fixed all of the Vilna editions and the printed editions and beautiful footnotes that you cannot learn the Rambam without. But not only does it not have vowels, not only is it hard to find, not only is it a huge set, not only is it very expensive, it could cost you maybe close to $1,000 in the United States. It also is all in Hebrew and maybe not so approachable to everyone in the shiur. The second edition of the Rambam is that of the Mif'al Mishneh Torah, Rabbi Dr. Yochai Makbili. And it comes in a 1-volume set that we use here in the Bet HaKnesset. But this 4-volume set, which should run you in the United States somewhere between $200 and $250. I own 3 of these sets. I don't own 3 of anything. 3 of these sets. Because, by the way, a 4th. My brother Ronen, he should live and be well, he has a set in New York that every time we do an event in New York, he brings it with him to the shiur, because I can't think of giving a shiur without having this particular edition of the Rambam near me. It has in it all of the texts of Rav Kapach, vowelized, with punctuation, broken up beautifully into sections with tables of contents and indexes and pictures and a brief commentary on the side, the commentary of the Rambam on the Rambam. One second, come on, I think there's that. Can you still hear me? Can someone speak so I can make sure I hear you? Okay. Okay. This edition of the Rambam is simply fantastic. Its most famous part is it has a commentary of the Rambam on himself. So everywhere the Rambam uses a phrase or a word or mentions an idea, they cross-reference, and it's beautifully done. As I want to look with you at the Rav Kapach edition first, just to understand what we are looking at, and then we'll jump deep into the introduction of the laws of the Sanhedrin. Because from here on out, we're going to be studying Rabbeinu Rambam's laws of Sanhedrin, together with the notes and the comments of Rav Chaim David Halevi, whose guidance we've been taking until now. So on the top of the page, Rabbeinu Rambam begins every single one of his books, no exception. Every one of his books with the same pasuk. B'Shem Adonai El Olam. In the name of Adonai, the God of the world. For those of you who are in my Shabbat afternoon Rebbe Liab and Amozed class, perhaps El Olam means more to you today than it did a month ago. But if you look at footnote number 1, Aleph, on the bottom of the page, it says Rav Kapach, Zohi הפתיחה הרגילה של רבנו בכל ספריו בלי יוצא מן הכלל. This is the opening of the Rambam to every one of his books, without an exception. Opening the Mishneh Torah, opening the Mishnah, opening the letters of the Rambam, doesn't matter what the Rambam wrote, he begins every book with this sentence. The context of the sentence, someone tell me? Not all at once, it's a pasuk from Bereshit. B'Shem Adonai El Olam. Where is this pasuk? What is it? Who said that? Who just spoke? Oh, Yitzchak, Shalom Aleichem. Okay. See, someone knows just enough. Avraham Avinu, in Bereshit, end of chapter 21, after an alliance with Avimelech in Beersheba, this is mamash now. This was Parashat Shavua. So I'm sure everybody was in the Beit HaKnesset last Shabbat and they heard the Torah reading. Vayita Eshel beVeer Sheva. Avraham Avinu planted an Eshel. You figure out on your own what is an Eshel. In Beer Sheva. Vayikra Sham b'Shem Adonai El Olam. And he called out in that place the name of Adonai, God of the universe. This sentence is very important. Open up Sefaria for me to Mishneh Torah, the book of Mada, the laws of Avodah Zarah, idol worship, forbidden worship, I don't know how they write it. Chapter 1. You all know the famous story of Avraham Avinu. He grows up to a family of idol worshippers. Mamash, idol worshippers. That's where he grew up, Avraham Avinu. And there's the story of Avraham Avinu who discovers HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are all kinds of people who tell you that he was 3 years old. I'm not sure what a 3-year-old is supposed to be like. From a very young age, Avraham Avinu began to search for the truth. And he found it. And when he found the truth, he couldn't keep it to himself. He began to argue with all the people around him, until ultimately the Midrash tells us a story, which the Rambam mentions here, so it's not a random Midrash. What happens in the Midrash? There's a king. There's a king named Nimrod. He doesn't like Avraham Avinu so much. Why doesn't he like Avraham Avinu so much? Okay, I know it's been a long time. We learned with each other. There's a button that says unmute. You can click it. Avraham Avinu was calling out in the name of a God that Nimrod didn't authorize. And this becomes a big struggle for Nimrod, the political struggle. Ultimately, says Rambam in the middle of Halakha Gimel, number 3, once Avraham Avinu was successful in disproving them logically, how do analphabetic people deal with logic? Violence. Bikesh HaMelech lehogo. If I can't defeat you logically, then I'm just going to kill you. Because that's how it works. I don't want to deal with you. I don't want to engage with you. So the only thing I have left to do is to kill you. Think of Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman and King James of Aragon. This is something that repeats itself over and over. נעשה לו נס ויצא לחרן, a miracle happens to him, he goes to Haran, והתחיל לעמוד ולקרוא בקול גדול לכל העם. And he began publicly, as loud as he could, speak to the whole world. ולהודיעם שיש אלוה אחד לכל העולם, and to tell them that there is one God in the world. ולא ראוי לעבוד, and only he should be served. והיה מהלך וקורא ומקבץ העם, and he would go and speak, and he would gather the nation together, מעיר לעיר, from city to city. ומממלכה לממלכה, and from nation to nation, country to country. עד שהגיע לארץ כנען, till he reached the land of Canaan, והוא קורא, and he's still calling out. שנאמר ויקרא שם בשם אדוני אל עולם. That he called out there to Adonai, the God of the world. By the way, for those of you who've been studying Abraham Mosaic with me, the significance of El Olam, Avraham Avinu is reminding the people, I am not trying to get you to force you to believe in the God of Israel, which is not in Israel yet. The God of Avraham. It's not a personal God of mine. It's not a God of my family. It's not a God of my nation. It's the God of the whole world. He created you too. He sustains you also. For you to believe in this God is not a betrayal of everything that you know. It's returning to who you really are. This is what Avraham Avinu does. That's why any person in the world who leaves Avodah Zarah and joins the Jewish people automatically receives the title of honor, Ben Avraham Avinu, the child of Avraham, meaning I am a person who followed literally in the footsteps of Avraham. But the fact that in the Jewish community today, there are gerim who are afraid to say Ben Avraham Avinu, they just say Ben Avraham, because they don't want to be identified, chas v'shalom, as a ger, is probably one of the most horrific realities that exist in the Jewish community right now. I'm jealous of people who can use the title. I'm telling you that my father is a very important person. But I'm jealous because my father is not Avraham Avinu. I go to the Torah with my father's name. Baruch Hashem, my father will not be offended. My father also wants to go Ben Avraham Avinu. If somebody were to write a ketubah, and in the ketubah they would just write Ben Avraham, the ketubah would not be valid. Why did we create a reality in Am Yisrael that the people that are mamash like our forefathers, that we should look up to, somehow have to fear? I'm preaching to the choir. I know there's nobody here that's chashud, nobody here that's suspected of these kind of crimes. וכיוון שהיו העם מתקבצים לו ושואלים לו על דבריו, and when the nation would come and they would gather around him and ask him questions, היה מודיע לכל אחד ואחד לפי דעתו. He spoke to every single individual based on their own ability to comprehend the truth. עד שחזירהו לדרך האמת, until he returned them to the path of truth. You know, the Muslims, they don't even use the word convert. They intentionally use the word revert. Yes? A person is going back to the way of truth. עד שהתקבצו אליו אלפים ורבבות, till hundreds of thousands of people came to him. והם אנשי בית אברהם. They are the people that the Mikra calls the people of the house of Abraham. ושתל בליבם העיקר הגדול הזה, and he implanted in their hearts this tremendous principle. וחיבר בו ספרים, and he wrote books about it. והודיעו ליצחק בנו, and he taught this to Yitzchak his son. וישב יצחק מלמד ומחזיר, and Yitzchak, he sat and studied. ויצחק הודיעו ליעקב, ומינה ולמד, וישב מלמד ומחזיר כל הנביאים אליו. Avraham Avinu's whole purpose in life was B'Shem Adonai El Olam. I want the whole world to know, not just that there is a God, but He is one God and He is God of the whole world. Rabbeinu HaRambam, when adopting, who is he going to emulate? Whose Torah is he trying to perpetuate in the world? It's the Torah of Avraham Avinu. A Torah that fits for the whole world and that brings all of the people in the world to know one God that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the significance of this pasuk. Rabbeinu Rambam opens every single book with this pasuk. Shem Adonai El Olam. And he continues with a pasuk from Mishle. Every one of the Rambam's books, after he says B'Shem Adonai El Olam, he always quotes one pasuk where he tries to connect the idea found in the written text to what he's about to talk about, which area of halakha he's about to speak about right now. And Rabbeinu Rambam chose this verse, and it says the following: Gam ele lachachamim. These things are for the wise people to think about. Haker panim b'mishpat bal tov. It is not good to show favoritism in judgment. Which laws are we about to study? I'm practicing the mute button. The laws of the Sanhedrin. Yes? So then we're talking about judges. Omer lerasha tzadik ata, yikevuhu amim, yizamuhu leumim. A person who tells the wicked that they are righteous, all the nations of the world will curse them. What is that supposed to tell you? It's a question.
The concept of without possibly calling out and protesting when people are acting wicked and not being silent in the face of evil or condoning evil.
Good. That's what he's telling him to do. What does the nation have to do with it? I was teaching a shiur yesterday here in the Beit Knesset, and we're talking about bugs and salad and vegetables. We came to that conversation. And I said, it's something interesting I want you to know. You may not think about this, but non-Jews also don't like to eat bugs in their salad. It sounds like a radical concept. It's not just Jews they don't like to eat worms and bugs, and it's a thing that people don't want to do. The nations of the world also recognize righteousness. You can imagine a reality in which we look at the Jewish people, and the leadership of the Jewish people are doing things that even the most base pagans on earth know is wrong. That the Jewish leadership might say that a person who is evil is really righteous, everybody will hate you for that. And then he says the following pasuk: V'lamochichim yin'am. Those who give musar should be pleasant. V'alehem tavo birkat tov. And to them should come a blessing of good. What does that pasuk mean? No. In New York, it must be very cold. It's cold in San Diego, but I see that in New York, everybody's frozen. When a person wants to be effective in judgment, and the way to do it is through pleasantness. There are people who think that the best way to give musar is to lash out at people and to hate them and to ruin them and to destroy them. But that's not the way that our Chachamim behave. Divrei Chachamim b'nachad nishmayim. Our Chachamim, they speak in ways that are kind, in ways that are calm. They're not hysteric. They're not crazy. They're not mean. There's a mentality in the world. It doesn't matter that you don't like it, but they're speaking the truth. But it does matter that I don't like it. It does matter. Because if you want people to accept the truth, then it matters not just that you say the truth, but how you say the truth. In which way do you approach the truth? For the leaders of the Jewish people, it's not enough that you are right. It's not enough that what you are teaching is the truth. How do you present the truth? In which way do you speak? In which fashion, even when you're about to give severe judgment in a court? To do so with sensitivity? To do so with compassion? Someone's life on the line now. When Rambam chooses these Pesukim from Shlomo HaMelech, because who was wiser than Shlomo HaMelech to give us advice about these things? Rabbi Chaim David Halevi has a beautiful essay in which he shares that none of the prophets of Israel, not one of them, ever rebuked the Jewish people on their own, based on their own judgment. Not one prophet of Israel ever spoke harshly to Am Yisrael without HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling them to speak that way. Who is considered the most zealous prophet of Israel? Eliyahu Navi. But who says that Eliyahu Navi is a zealous prophet? Himself. He says about himself, I am the zealot who's being zealous for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Eliyahu Navi. Who's his, not his enemy, but who's the one who he's always picking on? It's his job. He's the prophet. Who's the king of Israel in the time of Eliyahu Navi? Achav, right? You notice when Achav goes to war, Eliyahu Navi encourages him. He strengthens him. He talks to him about success in the future. Eliyahu Navi, when he's speaking to Achav as a normal person, is speaking to him with love. Ahavat Israel. Love of a fellow. Only when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, rebuke Achav, does he rebuke Achav. Every single one of the prophets, every single one of them, chose first to love people, and only when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him to speak harshly, did he speak harshly. Try me. Go through the whole Nevi'im. Find me the one who on his own said, oh, you know why that happened to people on October 7th? You know why people die from that? You know why? Who speaks like that? Who says things like that? Unless HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to them directly. I once saw an interview with Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. I never learned from Rabbi Steinsaltz. I never met Rabbi Steinsaltz, but I once saw an interview with him. And some of the interviewer asked him something about the future of the Jewish people. And he said, I'm not the right person to ask. He said, seemingly every other rabbi on earth has a Ruach HaKodesh and knows the future. I'm the only one that God didn't speak to yet. So I'm not the right one to ask this question to. Of course, everything happens for a reason. And of course, everything is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But nobody here is a prophet to know why these things happen. And until then, what we know for sure is there is a mitzvah to love our fellow Jew. And that mitzvah applies also to the judge who is sitting in judgment. If you look in footnote bet of Rav Kapach, בכל פתיחות 13 ספרי משנה תורה אחידים, כתבי היד והדפוסים. In all of the 13 previous books of the Mishneh Torah, the opening verses that are found in the handwritten manuscripts of Yemen and the printed editions that are printed in Europe, they're all identical. פרט הספר האחרון, aside from this last book. ואף גם זאת רבנו פותח כמעט בפסוק אחד המסמל לתוכן הספר. But also in this book, the Rambam chooses one verse, almost one verse, because really it's one long verse, broken up into smaller ones, that teach the context of the book. ובספר זה, שהוא אחרון הספרים, נחלקו המסורות. And in this particular book is the only place where the printed editions of the Rambam contradict the handwritten Yemenite manuscripts of the Rambam. בעוד שבכל ספרי תימן, העתיקים, פתח רבנו בשלושה מקראות הללו, that in all of the ancient Yemenite manuscripts, Rabbeinu Rambam uses the verses from Mishlei that we mentioned now. But there are other verses that are different. If you look in the edition of Rav Kapach, there are two other verses. One of them from Tehillim. The pasuk in Tehillim says the following: Adonai yadin amim, shofteni Adonai, kitzidki uchtumi alai. Adonai will punish the people. Judge me, Adonai, and reward me according to my righteousness and according to my integrity. This particular pasuk, if you look in footnote Gimel, הרי בכתב היד של ספר משנה תורה המצויר והמאויר להפליא, in the edition of the Rambam, in the handwritten manuscript that is illustrated, there's an illustrated manuscript of the Rambam with pictures. הנמצאים בבודפשט מאז שנת, from the year 1195 there in Budapest. שהוא כנראה נכתב ואויר בצרפת, which was probably written and illustrated in France. כפי שכתב הגב הרבה והכיר האוהב תורת ישראל ומכבד תורה ולומדיה, והוא עצמו תלמיד חכמים. תורם למוסדות חסד וצדקה ביד רחבה, אשר נדבר רוחו אותו להוציא לאור את כל ציורי ויורי הפתיחות והחתימות של דברים בשעת תורה לרבנו. הוא ניהו הרב ברוך הלוי שטרסברגר שליטה. He mentions that he received this, a copy of this from a certain Rabbi Baruch Halevi Strasburger. I hope I'm saying his name okay. And in that particular manuscript, בכתב יד זה פתח רבנו לפי כתבי יד זה בפסוק זה. He chose this verse from Tehillim to open up the book of Shofatim. But if you are going to go and open up a printed Mishneh Torah, in the printed edition of the Mishneh Torah, you have an entirely different verse, also from Mishlei, but from Mishlei, chapter 31. And it says the following: Petach picha, shefot tzedek, v'din ani v'evion. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and obtain justice for the poor and the downtrodden, or the destitute. All of these pesukim, though, have one thing in common. They're all related to shoftim. And they're all good character traits that shoftim should have. Nonetheless, Rav Kapach writes in footnote 4, Dalet, Vilu b'chol sifrei tfusim, in all of the printed editions of the Rambam, Patach Rabbeinu Sefer Zeh b'pasuk Zeh. Rabbeinu Rambam opened the Mishneh Torah with this pasuk. Umitoch hizdahut im kitvei yad teman, and because of my I don't know if that's not a good word. Affinity is a great word. Because of my affinity, I like it. Because of my affinity to the writings of handwritten manuscripts of Yemen, higdamti et ptichat kitvei yad teman. I put first the opening verses of the manuscripts of Yemen, v'achrav ptichat kitvei yad hameuyar v'metzuyar, and then the illustrated edition of the Rambam, v'achrav ptichat sifrei hadfus. Then I put the standard printed edition of the Rambam that we find in bookshelves everywhere. Now that you see that, the book of Shoftim, Sefer 14, is book number 14. Rambam's Mishneh Torah means question mark? Unmute.
The repetition of the Torah.
The repetition of the Torah. Okay, where does he get that word from? Where's that phrase from? What other book is a Mishneh Torah? Devarim. So the book of Devarim is a restatement of the 4 books of the Mikra until then, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. And so essentially Rabbeinu Rambam's whole hope, like he says in the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, is that this book will be a restatement of the whole Torah, written in oral all together in one book. And out of that Mishneh Torah, there are 14 volumes, leading people to call this book the Yad HaChazaka, the mighty hand. Why the mighty hand?
14, you've done it.
Very good. 14 is Yudalet, Yudalet is Yad. At the 14 books of the Mishneh Torah, and number 14, Sefer Arba'asar, number 14, V'hu Sefer Shofetim. It's the book of Shofetim. And he says the following, Hilchotav Chamesh. There are 5 sections of halakha in this book. V'zehu Siduran, and this is their order. Hilchot Sanhedrin, Ve'onashin HaMisurin Lahen. The laws of Sanhedrin, and the consequences that they are given authority to mete out. Hilchot Edut, the laws of witnesses and testimony. Hilchot Mamrim. How do I even translate Mamrim? Anyone have a good English word for me, Mamrim?
Is it like defiance or
Yeah, let's say the defiance of the orders of the Sanhedrin. Yeah, so whoever is contradicting the Sanhedrin. Hilchot Evil, the laws of mourning, lo alenu. Very interesting why the laws of mourning show up in the middle of a book on national law. Hilchot Melachim, the laws of kings, umilchamot, and laws of war. For those of you who've been studying laws of war for me within Mishneh Torah, that's where we've been studying most of our time. And this is where Rabbeinu HaRambam is going to begin the entire journey of the laws of Sanhedrin. Do any of you have Chumashim or Tanachim handy? Yeah? Very good. If you have a Tanakh in front of you, then that's going to be something incredible. Let me... Could take a little more of your time. We could start learning some Mikra. You let? Okay. I figured through silence, then Shtika Kehoda, rabbis tell us. Maybe before that. Before that. Let's take a look at this. If you look in the table of context, I want to explain to you how the Rambam's laws of Sanhedrin work, and perhaps I'll share with you something then. If you look at the other PDF of the Mishneh Torah, okay, so if you go to the one that's titled Mifal Mishneh Torah, you should be on page 764. I cannot tell you enough. You should own a set of these books. Really, if you can and you can afford it, do it. All the other books that are on your waiting list, they can stay on your waiting list. This one cannot. I rarely recommend editions, especially contemporary editions of books, as much as I recommend this one. Mori Harav, Harin Kabad Mishkavo, would always say that if he had to get stuck on a deserted island, and you would ask him that he could only take 2 books with him, he always said, I would take a Tanakh and a Shulchan Aruch. So, Mori Harav always, send me a Tanakh and a Shulchan Aruch, I'll be fine for the rest of my life. And I'm not here to disagree with Mori Harav, but if you were to ask me that same question, I would tell you, send me with the Tanakh and Mishneh Torah. The reason is very simple for me. Though when it comes to ruling halakha, you know me long enough to know that we rule like the Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam's work of the Mishneh Torah is not just wholesome and complete. It includes thousands of areas of halakha that Maran doesn't talk about. Aside from that, I am a person who likes to study, like I shared earlier, in a very organized, methodical fashion. I don't like to jump around. I don't like to take shortcuts. I don't like to cut corners. I like to spend time going in a very clear path forward. In general, I had someone visit me recently, and they brought me a little booklet of Torah to study, and they wanted my opinion on what they wrote. And I studied what they wrote, and they were waiting for my opinion, and I kept avoiding them and avoiding them. At a certain point, my wife asked me, she said, why are you avoiding them? I said, I don't understand one thing that they wrote. What do you mean don't understand what they wrote? I said, it's written like in classic yeshiva style. Yes, it says halacha on the cover, but my brain doesn't know how to think like that. It's like, there's no, I don't know how to explain to you. It's like if you took a kangaroo and you put him in a room and you jump from side to side and up and down, right and left, that's how they wrote the book of halacha. I couldn't understand for the life of me, not because of the content, because simply there was no organization. Rabbeinu Harambam, the exact opposite. You always know where to find what you're looking for in the writings of the Rambam. And just that on its own, for me, is the most incredible thing about this writing. Forget the style, forget the context, forget the content. Just the sanity that comes from knowing how to learn a book clearly. So look with me on page 764. I want to share with you the breakdown, because hopefully you and I will get from chapter 1 of the Laws of Sanhedrin all the way to chapter 26 of the Laws of the Sanhedrin. I say hopefully, because it's going to take us a long time at the rate we go, but we'll get there. B'ezrat Hashem. I want to share with you the breakdown of sections. So the first 5 chapters of Rabbeinu Rambam's Laws of Sanhedrin are Minui HaDayanim, Samchutam, Uminyanam. The appointment of judges, how we appoint them, the process of appointing judges. Many people have asked in the last year and a half, how do we appoint them? Is it democratic? Who do they represent the people? Who are they? What type of people? All of that is in the first 5 chapters. And by the way, whereas that might seem a little bit technical, a very big part of this conversation for Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. Do you have the Dvar HaMishpat PDF next to you also? If you look at Rabbi Chaim David Halevi's Dvar HaMishpat, you'll notice that early on in his table of contents, on page 7 of the PDF Dvar HaMishpat, under the letter Zayin, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi has an entire section that you and I study together quite soon. Mishtara v'tafkideha. The police force and its purpose. And the limitations of a police force. And you and I once studied in New York a little bit about Rabbi Chaim David Halevi's perspective on the police. And this is very important. Why is it important? What does it have to do with Sanhedrin? Because the Torah tells us, Shofetim v'shodrim. You have to appoint both judges and officers, which tell you that according to halakha, there are basic requirements to become a police officer. Because a police officer is really some type of, I'm going to borrow a term from Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, he's a field judge. A police officer is not a police officer. He is the law. He is the judge. That police officer, when making a decision to stop someone, to detain someone, to arrest someone, to take away momentarily or even longer their freedoms, to violate their privacy, to search their body, their car, their house, whatever that might be. That's a quick decision that a police officer makes, a decision of judgment. Is it a legal stop? I know you know these terms from American law. But in American law, we have a little bit this understanding. A police officer does, he's the brute force. They do whatever needs to get done. Go explain yourself to the judge. I'm not involved. In halakha, it's quite the opposite. The police force is the entry level of judgment. And that means that the people who serve in a police capacity must fulfill all of the requirements that a judge has to have, all the prerequisites of a judge that is sitting in a bedin. Kind people, educated people, righteous people, people who love truth, people who hate money, people, all of those requirements Because how else can I trust a person like that on a turn of a dime to take away all of my freedoms? This is a very relevant part of halakha. Like we're in a country that recently had elections, and regardless of where you come out on that political spectrum, much of the conversation, who do you appoint as leadership? What kind of leader am I looking for? What are the qualities? What are the values? A Jewish person would find guidance in these 5 chapters of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. In sections 6 through 7, we have an area. What happens in areas of mistakes in judgment? How you make decisions in the Bedin. 8, 9, 10. How you make a decision when the Bedin is tied on matters, or the Sanhedrin is tied on matters. Halakha 11, all about financial law and capital punishments, death, the death penalty. That continues into laws 12, 13, 14, 15. 17 through 19 is all about malkut. Malkut is all about physical consequences the Bedin, lashes, can hand out. Chapters 20 through 24, you and I have touched a little bit on chapter 24 of the Laws of Sanhedrin, which is all about the need to judge in righteousness. And ultimately, chapters 25 and 26, the laws of respect for the Bedin, the decorum of the Bedin, the authority of the Bedin, the need to, perhaps all the laws of, being held in contempt of court, or not respecting the court, and therefore, in turn, the consequences of a person who curses the judges, or curses the law, or the system, or the court. All of those are inside of this one package of the laws of Sanhedrin. And inside of these 26 chapters, notice 26, by the way, is the numerical value of Yud Kei Vav Kei. And don't think that any of the Rambam's enumeration of chapters is ever unintentional. Al tihi dan yichidi. Do not judge alone, says the Mishnah. Ki en dan yichidi ela echad. There's only one who can judge truly on his own. That is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The rest of us require a system of righteousness, a system of justice. Notice in the United States we call it the legal system. In Judaism, we demand more than just law. We demand justice. Not always is what is legal just. That's why there is a Torah commandment, V'asita hayashar. Unmute. V'atov. Very good. You must do not just that which is righteous, but also that which is good, which is just. It's important to have both tov v'yashar in all of judgment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately, Elohim nitzav ba'adat el. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that sits in the kisot mishpat, in the throne of judgment. And if you look at all of these areas of halakha, there's obviously categories and subcategories and other parts of this. But hopefully, you and I will get through this one halakha at a time, one chapter at a time, and we'll finish all of what we need to know about how a Jewish government, a functional Jewish government, is supposed to operate and look like. And so that brings me to homework for next week, because I want to spend the entire shiur next week with the Tanakh, the whole time, because for me it's important, if we're going to study these halachot, that you and I become experts in every single pasuk in the Mikra that refers to Sanhedrin, Shoftim, judges, judgment, everything that we need to know. So I'm going to read to you a list of pesukim. Cheski, I feel like last time you sent me the list that I said. Could you do that again for me? Is that possible?
Yeah.
If it's not too much of a tircha, if somebody else wants to do it, it's also okay. Let me tell you this pesukim that we need. For next week's shiur, Shemot, chapter 18, particularly verses 21 through 26. Devarim, chapter 1, particularly verses 13 through 17. Devarim chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. B'Midbar chapter 11, verses 16 through 17. Devarim chapter 17, verses 8 through 13. The book of Shemot, chapter 23, verses 1 through 8. The book of Vayikra, chapter 19, verses 12 through 35. The book of Devarim, chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. Perhaps a more dark area of this, but part of the laws. Book of Devarim, chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. I have three more, and then you might as well read the whole Tanakh till next week's class. Yeah? Devarim, chapter 25, verses 1 to 3. Let's jump to Divrei Hayamim. I think in English they call that Chronicles. Devarim 2, chapter 19, verses 1.
They were young too.
Yeah, Devarim 2, but chapter 19. 4 through 10, that's a story of Yehoshaphat appointing judges. And last but not least, Shemot chapter 22, verse 27. So, I think I have 12 sections of the Mikra that I would appreciate you looking into before next week's shiur. And I'll tell you why it's important. I would really love to spend some time understanding those Pesukim without having to teach them as if it's the first time that you've ever looked at them. And it's really important. If you want to ask me which commentaries to look at, don't. Just look at the Torah. Just read the text as the text reads itself. If you want, because you itch and you don't know how to read without a commentary, if you have access to Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, look at that. If you don't have Rav Saadia Gaon, then Rabbeinu Avraham Ben Ezra. And after that, Rabbi David Kimchi, and after that, don't look at anything else. Just those commentaries. Because those will help you understand what's written inside of the text. And then, Bezrat Hashem, you and I will pick up next week by learning all of these Pesukim so that we can begin the following week with the writings of the Rambam in the Mishneh Torah itself, in the laws of Sanhedrin. So Bezrat Hashem, thank you so much for learning Torah with me, but I look forward to seeing you, God willing, next week.